Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education where your ROI on your time and your money is indisputably worth it. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, May 30th, and welcome to episode number 70, How to Handle a Weakness in Your Admissions Application. In this week's news, Temple University settles suit over fudged data on MBA Ranking. And we're in chapter 70 of 171 answers, and we're talking through how your student can avoid an automatic denial if their high school file contains negative information. And for our question segment, we're addressing the breaking news around the College Board rolling out what they're calling the Environmental Context Dashboard, or ECD. So Mark is answering questions that he's been receiving over the last week. And Mark is wrapping up his interview with Mr. Yancie Davis in the final part of using non-cognitive variables in the admissions process.
Anika, somebody had a graduation since our last recording.
Who could that
be?
Give
me the give us the details.
Oh my God, it's too no, because I'm gonna start digressing into all kinds of life. Christopher Jalen Madden.
Is it good life?
Yes, good life. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Yes, Jalen graduated from Davidson on Sunday, May 19th at 10 a.m. And it was completely awesome. The weather was awesome. The people that were there celebrating with us were awesome. And it was just, oh my God. I'm still kind of celebrating a little bit, but it's okay.
Good. And your Airbnb worked out?
Oh, MG. You just don't even know. Yes, we were on the lake and nobody wanted to leave because it was so nice. It was so awesome. It was, yeah. Jayla even sent me a little text letting you know that, of course, they went off and partied like late into the night. He's like, oh my God, Mama, thank you so much. Love you. That was great. So yeah, it was awesome. Yay. Congratulations, Jay.
Well, congratulations, Jay. And I just literally got back like an hour and a half ago from Minneapolis.
That's
5 days. Yep. 5 great visits to the University of Minnesota, St. Olaf, Bethel, Carleton, and Macalester. 5 very different colleges, but 5 very impressive colleges. And actually, Dave Warner, the director of admissions at St. Olaf, will be on our podcast later in 2019 and for an interview talking about the different sections of the Common App. So, and I also had a graduation, Anika, as I was in town for my only brother, Norm. His daughter, Kristen, graduated from Bethel. Huge shout out to Kristen Stucker, graduated summa cum laude. Congratulations, Kristen. Uncle Mark loves you, and I am proud of you. So and I was Airbnb-ing as we also stayed in a great house.
Wait, I'm sorry, Mark. I got to add too, because you reminded me, Jalen graduated cum laude, so that was completely awesome as well. So
awesome. Get it in there. Awesome. All right. Well, we are we're doing one of our countdowns, which you love, Anika.
I do.
You love our countdowns, and we're looking at 9 different careers that are growing the fastest as far as their projected growth rate from 2016 to 2026. All of whom pay over $75,000 for median income. So number 9 was operations research analyst. Number 8, information security analyst. And tied for number 8 is a physical therapist. So let me say a little bit about physical therapy and then get some chime in from you there, Miss Anika. So physical therapists, sometimes called PTs, help injured people or ill people improve their movement and manage their pain. These therapists are often an important part of rehab, treatment, and prevention of patients with chronic conditions, illnesses, or injuries. Their work environment is oftentimes in private offices and clinics, hospitals, patients' homes, and nursing homes. They spend a lot of time on their feet, actively working with patients. And how do you become a physical therapist? Well, you need to get a DPT degree, which is a doctor in physical therapy, and all states require you to be licensed. The median wage for physical therapists in May of 18, $87,930, and employment for physical therapists is projected to grow 28% from 2016 to 2026, much faster than the average of all occupations. Demand for physical therapy will continue with aging baby boomers who are not only staying active later in life, but are susceptible to health conditions such as strokes that may require physical therapy. In addition, physical therapists will be needed to treat people with mobility issues stemming from chronic conditions such as diabetes and obesity. What say you, Miss Anika Madden, about physical therapy?
Well, not much, but I can tell you that I'm not surprised because Jalen actually has a cousin. Well, I've just heard of several people going into the field. Jalen has a cousin. She and her new husband are physical therapists. And yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I love it. And I can actually see Naya doing that too. But again,
I knew you were going to bring one of your kids up. I mean, I just didn't know. Is it going to be Naya or John? One of them. Knew you were going to.
I can see her doing that, though. She loves doing like the little sports management team and all that stuff. But okay, sorry, Naya. Bet. Yeah.
Can't have her doing 6 careers. Well, you can. The way nowadays we jump around from career to career. But we're just sharing this with you all out there. If you're thinking about researching something that has a fast growth rate, which means jobs will be plentiful, and you won't need to just have a cup at the corner and get paid like minimum wage. We're sharing some ideas, so it's all good. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
Okay, Mark, this week's article, you found it in the Wall Street Journal. It's written by Miss Kelsey Gee, or G, maybe, but Gee. And it's entitled Temple University Settles Suit Over Fudged Data on MBA Ranking. And so I know you've mentioned this before, but Temple agrees to pay nearly $5.5 million to current and former business school students after the school acknowledged that its online MBA program was ranking was based on false data. And so Temple admitted that there was no liability or wrongdoing as part of the settlement. But so I didn't do anything, but here millions of dollars. I don't get that, but let's move on. And this specifically is Temple's Fox School of Business that was rated #1 by U.S. News and World Report for so many consecutive years for its online MBA program. And Mark, just one last mention I'll put in here is that about 3,000 students who were enrolled in the program, they are expected to receive some kind of payment, even though they don't know how much. But I took out my little calculator and I divided 5.5 million by 3,000. But it's only like $1,800 per person, which actually seems like nothing. And, the article goes on to cite a couple other things they're trying to do to make up with these 3,000 people. But Mark, I'll say that my booming question around all this is that, okay, they might not have been #1, but was it a bad program? I mean, could they still be a good program and just not be #1? I mean, I'm sure they'll eventually get back to normal, but I don't know. That's just my little first question around all of that.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's saying it was a bad program, but the lawsuit said it was based on the fact that people said they chose the school because of the #1 ranking, expecting that would result in employers being more willing to hire them and being willing to pay them more money. So the lawsuit says you cost me money because now if you're not perceived as #1, I'm less likely to get a job offer and probably offer will pay me less. So it's going to cost me money. So that was the basis of the lawsuit. I don't think anybody was allocating that the program, was horrendous, but just that fabrication impacted reputation. And now you're impacting my employment and now you're impacting my pocketbook.
Makes sense.
Any other questions at all about the article?
I'm just glad again, I don't get that whole settlement thing where, okay, we didn't do anything wrong, but here's all this money. I don't think we'll ever get that. But I think what the author cited in there was that they were just saying that this was in the best interest of themselves and the students. Let's just move on. Like, let's just give y'all some money and let's just get it back together.
I mean, that's just a common thing that happens all the time with this, this is sort of a safe face saving thing. It protects them against future lawsuits, so it locks the money in so the school can know they're not going to have endless lawsuits and being trampled through the mud over and over and over reputation-wise. But at the same time, it's extremely expensive to bring a lawsuit like that against the school. So for those who are getting the money, they don't run the risk of going all through the process and one maybe being bankrupt or not being able to afford the attorneys and then possibly having them rule against them. And that just happens all the time in court. It's part of, it's called plea bargaining. And it's just part of the way our system works.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to share a couple of things about this article because we always like to not only pick articles, we like to say, well, so what's the so what for our listeners? And
all right.
So when I look at rankings, it's totally understandable why there would be a lot of interest in rankings. First of all, everybody knows that not all colleges are created equal. Nobody would ever say that. I would never say that. You would never say that. So everyone knows all colleges are equal. Also, people, students and parents, expect the college to tell you that they're great. So it's kind of like getting a recommendation from your uncle or your parent, right? You don't get a recommendation because of course your parent's going to say you're great. So that's why you use teachers and other recommenders. So people to some extent, they want, when they go to an information session or talk to an admission officer, they want them to have a sense of conviction and belief about their school. But there's an aspect of which is kind of dismissed if you tell me you're great, because that's kind of what you're supposed to do. So they're always looking for outside, arbiters of objectivity. And rankings are perceived to be outside arbiters of objectivity. So I can totally understand the demand from the public, like somehow let me know amongst all these schools that I'm looking at, which ones are better than others. So there's a real craving for rankings from the public. U.S. News and World Report literally would have closed if it wasn't for their college rankings edition, which supplies almost 50% of their revenue year after year after year. And then there was a Cornell study. Yeah, a Cornell study that came out, quite some time ago now, but it showed that when a college moves up in the rankings, they get a lot more applications, their yield goes up, and they have the ability to charge more money, and the public is willing to pay for it. So what it does is it produces this demand from parents, demand from students, and acute interest from institutions to not only be ranked, but to be ranked high. Because if you can get, if high ranking means you'll get more applications, you'll get a higher yield. For our first time listeners, yield is just the percentage of accepted students that accept the offer and enroll. And you can charge more money, and people are more willing to pay $70,000 instead of $20,000 because they feel like they're getting a better degree. So it's this confluence of factors comes together, and it creates this environment where there is incredible pressure on colleges to cheat and to obfuscate what the real rankings really are. So over the years, Anika, lots and lots of people have been caught fabricating and fudging their data. Like this is Temple's online business school, right? Mm-hmm. George Washington. I remember George Washington was caught, and Wake Forest was caught, and Claremont McKenna, Bucknell, Emory, Tulane, Baylor, the U.S. Naval Academy, and Clemson are some of the colleges caught cheating by providing fabricated data to improve their rankings. And those were just the ones that were caught. Now, a great article to read on this topic is entitled "Obsession with Academic Rankings Leads to Cheating by Colleges." This appeared in the Daily Breeze on February 5th, 2012. And we'll put this article in the show notes in case you want to Google it. Just this week, Oklahoma was busted for fabricating data to manipulate their rankings, and it was deemed as intentional. There were a number of people that were called out for infractions just this week alone, but they were seen as maybe we made an accidental mistake. So this is something that happens a lot. And I remember, Anika, one of my former students, it was so cool. I recruited her for boarding school. Then I was her college counselor, placed her in college, continued to stay in touch with her. Then she went into college admissions, and then she would come to Atlanta recruiting students, and we'd get together. It was really cool. And we were sitting down over dinner once, and I was talking to her about all of these schools that had been caught fabricating their data. And her response was, "I'm surprised so few have been caught. Like, so many people are out here doing this." And here's actually a quote from Jerome Lucindo, who's the executive director of USC and their Center for Enrollment Research. he said it was important to remember that outright falsifying reports was only one way to manipulate the rankings. And there are many other ways to manipulate the rankings. They can be manipulated by recruiting students who will not come, therefore lowering your acceptance rate, by deferring to future semester students who will not be admitted in the fall, and by counting faculty as teaching resources who only teach nominal or tangentially. Now, what this refers to, Anika, is one of the factors that's looked at is what is your faculty-student ratio, right? So one thing schools do is they recruit all these faculty that only teach like adjunct or teach a part-time course here or there, and they put that into their model. So people think, oh, it's a really low teacher-student ratio when it's really not. And another thing that schools do is like U.S. News doesn't usually use test score data and a lot of data, not just test score data, if somebody is admitted in the spring, only if they're admitted in the fall. So what happens is a college, they want this kid, but they don't want them to lower their ranking, so they admit them for the spring so they won't be in the numbers. So there's like so many ways in which people manipulate the numbers. And so the takeaway here is like, don't take rankings as gospel, because there's a lot of fudging that goes on and there's a tremendous amount of imprecision out there. What do you think?
I think I'm going to just follow your advice because it's just too much drama. Too much drama around that admissions world. It's crazy.
Yeah. So that's it. There's just tremendous pressure that colleges are facing right now to have more prestige. And the way they're perceived as having more prestige is to be seen as harder to get in. So it puts tremendous pressure on three things in particular: rankings, acceptance rates, and test score averages. And I'll say this really quickly. I remember when I was recruiting Anika for boarding school, and I was in a Tony, DC, Northern Virginia suburb, and we had a reception. It was kind of a reception where people would pop in and ask questions and kind of move on, almost more like an open house type. I mean, we had a whole presentation stuff, but it was kind of an open time for people to come. And 3 different times people came up and they're like, what is your acceptance rate? And I knew exactly what that meant. Like, is it low enough that there'll be some honor and status for me to tell people that my child is going to your school? And it put pressure on us. I felt pressure. I felt pressure like, you know what, we got it. Our acceptance rate was like 52% at the time. And I remember thinking, we got to go recruit more students because, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's just the pressure that admissions officers feel. Because if I could get that number down into the 30s, I think we could get more of these families. So it made us put more pressure to get more applications to make that acceptance rate even lower. So anyway, I'm just saying, be careful with the number. That's that saying, you can make statistics believe it, anything you want. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think so. I know what you mean.
That's all I care about. That's all I care about. But the bottom line is, be careful taking rankings as gospel, because there's a lot of fabrication out here.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right, Anika, we are looking at Chapter 70 in a book I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, where we go chapter by chapter and take a few points out of every chapter and talk about them at this point in our podcast. And this chapter deals with how you can keep a weakness in your application from leading to an automatic denial. You've read the chapter. Tell me what your takeaways were.
Well, I kind of want to jump to my question, but I am going to try to.
But the public doesn't know the content.
Yeah, I know.
You've read the chapter. You need to give an overview, so you can't be so anxious that you give your question.
I'm being selfish right now, Mark. I'm being selfish. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, well, let's start with the good news. Let's start with the good news in that you can absolutely apply damage control to anything that's in your file. So, and I appreciated the way, and I guess this is a good segue into my question, because I appreciated the way you outlined the most common flags. One being about discipline infractions, poor grades at certain times of the year, lack of academic rigor, confusion and course selection, like you've done like French for so long, then all of a sudden you jump to Spanish, and a lack of extracurricular activities. So the also big takeaway from this chapter, Mark, is that when you say to take that opportunity in the Common App in the additional explanation section to tell your story. Like, that's your time to say, okay, I know something's in there. Like, let me just tell you right now, this is what's happening. And I know that, the admissions officers are officers, even I think you allude to this in your story where you do the little stories in each chapter where the admissions person is saying, hey, just tell us, just be proactive. Tell us what happened. And of course, we want to help you. Like, we're here to help you. We're not, well, in most cases, they're there to help you to make it through that process.
Sure.
But so I am going to go ahead and jump to my question because this just recently happened where me and Janaea had to sign a form at her school saying that we waived the right to see her file before sent off to colleges. And so they put a little disclaimer in there to say, hey, we strongly encourage you to waive your right to that, because what I took from that is that it meant that you weren't scared about something. Like, I don't need to see it because I'm good. Like, I know I'm good. So going back to that list you provided, you say, okay, these are the common things, but are there any other things that might show up in the file that we just don't know about? Like, for example, and I'm giving these as examples only because we are fortunate to be at a school where, we get remarks from the teachers at the end of each first session, like, she's engaging, she's asking the right questions, I love her as a student. And so I wonder if had we not gotten those comments from her teachers and she wasn't being engaged or she wasn't doing something in class, is that other kind of stuff that pops up in that file? Or is it more general disciplinary kind of stuff?
Yeah, this is different than that. So the things we're referring to here, these are, and you use the term flag, which is an admissions term that most of our listeners will probably be familiar with, but some may not. Red flag is a term that's used, and a red flag is a danger sign, like risk factor over here. Whoa, be careful! I see a risk factor, and so these would be things that you like. Think about the 5 things you mentioned. Let's take a look at each one of them. Serious discipline infraction, such as suspensions, expulsion, or probation. Right. So let's just look at each of these from the standpoint of your question. Would the student know? Of course, the student's going to know if they've been suspended out of probation. Second thing, poor grades at some phase of your college experience, or high school experience. So let's say you are typically an A/B student, but let's say in the sophomore year you had 2 C's in the fall semester, right? Poor grades for a certain stretch of time. Lack of academic rigor in your overall curriculum choices. Didn't take, let's say you stopped foreign language after your sophomore year, you only took 2 years, and you're looking at some schools that are requiring 3 or 4. Confusing course selection, and that can be something similar to that as well. I gave examples like you don't take math your senior year. Why did you drop math is what someone's going to say.
We would like to thank every listener who has financially supported our show.
We want to make sure that our friends of the show know that you absolutely can make a one-time gift, or you can sign up for one of our monthly giving levels. Recently, we received a lovely letter from a college counselor who made a gift and said she wants to support the show quarterly, and that is also okay.
And if you make a one-time gift or a quarterly gift, you may still be entitled to the same benefits we extend to our monthly donors.
That's right. For a gift of $60 or more within the first 12 months, you'll get all the benefits we provide in our Sustainer plan. And a gift of $120 or more in the first 12 months, and you'll get all the benefits we offer in our Expander plan.
So to support the show, all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. Either click the monthly gift tab or the one-time gift tab.
And be sure to visit our frequently asked question page, which is also located at yourcollegeboundkid.com for more details. This is also where you can learn about the Sustainer plan and the Enhancer plan.
Your financial support helps us defray the sizable expenses that it takes to deliver all of this great content that is aimed to empower you and your family's college admissions journey.
Different people have different abilities to give, but whatever you can contribute will be greatly appreciated, and it will allow us to remain commercial free. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
Remember, high grades in demanding courses is the number one factor that schools use to determine who they admit. And then lack of extracurricular activities, right? So these are, do you see how all of those would be things that the student would be conscious of, and it shouldn't be anything that's you're blindsided by?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the question is,
Well, I guess.
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, you go
Well,
ahead.
no, I was just going to say because when you think about red flags, you think about the kid did something wrong, right? So,
But wrong
not
doesn't
having a
have
bunch
to
of
be discipline.
extracurricular.
Wrong can be a bad
Right. That's
choice
my
with
point.
courses.
Right. That's my point. And so
Or-
that's where I did exactly. So I wouldn't have considered that to be a bad thing that I didn't choose a French in the fourth year or something like that.
Right.
So I get those.
Mhm.
So, and so that's where I appreciated that context you put around that is like, oh, it's not just about you being suspended from school.
Correct.
These are these other things that could, they could see as not so good. So again, that was just, I appreciated that part of it. I just wondered if there was anything else that we need to be, I don't know. Flag to me seems a little relative. Like a flag for somebody might not be a flag for somebody else. I don't know. I don't want to get too in the weeds of it, but I was just curious if there was any other general, or is it just that they keep them so general so you can't start digging into a child to say, oh, they wouldn't keep their eyes open in class for the whole time or something like that.
No, it's nothing like that. These are things that you should be consciously aware of as a weakness in your application. And from an admissions standpoint, and I'm actually going to read that you alluded to the fact that in my book, I have a story at the end of every chapter, which I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually going to read this one because I think it will probably help our listeners. If some people have the book and some don't.
Okay.
Here's what I said. These are all true stories, by the way. When I was at the West End School, I started a national college fair that also gave workshops in various subjects in college admissions. We put current college admissions counselors on our panels and let them speak directly to students. 4 college admissions officers were on a panel entitled How to Get into a Selective School. And it was time to wrap up the workshop and hear from the panelists with their final comments. One of the officers, Sarah, spoke up with passion and gusto. She said, if you have a red flag in your file that is understandable, please explain to us what happened. We want to help you, but we can't read your mind. And if we don't have an explanation that makes sense, we'll be forced to assume the worst, and you will almost assuredly be denied. And so the point is, admissions officers really, they do want to admit. And there's a lot of times they see students they really, really like, but they're looking at this, and it could be any of those things I said, right? Like, why is there such a lack of track record in terms of activities? It doesn't seem this person really did anything. Now, here's the thing. If you didn't do anything, you have to be authentic. We're not talking about how can I come up with an excuse to fool them. That's not what this is about.
Right.
This is about sometimes they're legitimate reasons. So let's say your mom is a single mom with kids at home, and she has to work until 8 o'clock, and you couldn't get involved because you had to come home and watch little Jason and babysit him and clean the house. And that becomes a 30-hour job for you, taking care of your younger sibling and cleaning the house while your mom worked 2-3 jobs. That's the kind of thing that I'm saying you want to address, because if you don't address it, then you can be denied because they don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Perfect sense.
So the question is, how do you address it? What's the way to address these areas, Anika?
Well, like we said before, is that you take the opportunity to tell your story. And that's in that what you cite is the common application, having that section where it says, okay, additional information, go ahead and be proactive in that area. But you also point out the fact that not every school or every student has the Common App or the Coalition app, and there may not be an opportunity to tell that story. So that's at the point where you want to really start to have a conversation. You want to have a proactive conversation with that admissions person. Like you want to say, hey, you got my stuff now. And I just want to just by the way, this is what's going on over here.
Yes. So I would say you're absolutely right. You want to complete the additional information section if it's a Common App or the Coalition. If it's the institutional app from a school, because those are really, there are a few other applications. The Common App is by far the biggest national one. Some states, though, have their own application. The UC system in California has its own application. Georgia Futures in Georgia. A lot of states have a state Common App, sort of. And then there are other sort of apps that are out there, but a lot of times schools have their own application. And so if there is no question that is asked, is there anything else you would like to share with us that you haven't had a chance to share in your application? Then what you want to do is write something supplemental and send it in. So I like the idea of telling the admission officer, but not verbally. This is something where you want to have paper. Yeah, because if it's a committee,
okay,
you want everybody to be able to read what you submitted, not just the verbal rendition you told somebody that, you ever play that game where they go around and tell something a million times, it turns out different. Like, so so rather than trust that they will even bring it up, remember, people are reading files. And if they don't, it's multiple file readers. And so you need it to be in the file. But there was another thing I said that's important to do. And that is have one of your recommenders, usually the counselor would be the best person here, but sometimes a teacher who knows the extenuating circumstances that impacted their course is better than the school counselor when it comes to sharing the details. Ask if they can include it in their write-up, their written write-up. So it's not only coming from you, but it's coming from the counselor and they see it there. So those are the two big things that you want to do. And it's just really, really, really important. And, I give this example, Anika, I say, let's say you had a job interview and you're going to be an hour late. So you could show up an hour late and be like, hey, where's my interview? Good luck with that. Good luck with that. You might get the door slammed in your face, right? Or you could reach out 30 minutes ahead of time. I'm so sorry. There's an 18-wheeler turned over on the road. I'm not moving at all. It looks like I'm going to be 30 minutes late, and give them a heads up. And the reason why I like this example is because, look, you still may not get the job, right? They may be like, hey, sorry, you should have planned for it, or bad first impression. Right. But you may get grace. They may be like, hey, you know what? That's happened to me. No problem. Let's reschedule. Or, you know what? Hey, I have my free block next time. Come on in. And so it's the same way with this. Like, just because you have a compelling explanation, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be a mitigating factor. But at least it gives you a chance. At least it gives you a chance.
All right.
But this is not a total get out of jail free card. Not every transgression will be absolved. If you're trying, let's say you were, I'm just, first thing that popped in my mind. Let's say you were expelled, because a real serious fight occurred, and your attempt to explain it away. Hey, sometimes I just have a temper and I go off. Like, don't think that, okay, no problem. He explained it to us, so now we're good. It doesn't always work that way. The more selective the school, the more everything is magnified. And what's this is really important, because what we're not trying to do, sometimes when I talk about this, Anika, people, you can just see the wheels going in their mind. Ooh, I think I can come up with a nice doozy lie to explain away those low grades. This is not that. Like, authenticity is still essential. But sometimes there are reasons, like maybe your grandmother passed away. You were really close. Maybe your parents split up. Maybe even your dog, you were really close to your pet and they passed away. Or maybe you had pneumonia. And so all those kinds of things, people are human. And if they have an explanation that makes sense, that there's a chance that they'll give you grace, just like the 18-wheeler turning over. But the one thing that's important is the story has to fit the context. Do you know what I mean by that, Anika?
I think so.
So here's what I mean. Like, no, because I don't think I explained it well. So what I mean is, like, let's say you are explaining away your low grades intent by the pneumonia that you came down with, right?
Right.
Your grades better go up in 11th and the rest of 12th. You can't just say that and then you still you have other stretches where they're spotty. It has to be like, oh, that makes sense now, because look, that's the only time that happened. And you follow me? So that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, that's what I would have said.
That's your way of saying, you really didn't need to take those last 90 seconds.
I would have said that for real.
That's your polite way of saying, like, you don't know when to shut up. That's not your polite way of doing it.
It's all good.
I take the hit.
We love it, Mark.
Let's move on. All right. Yeah, right. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right. We are at the question segment, which we are going to address this breaking news. So Mark, oh my goodness, when you found out about this thing right here, the text messages. So
I blew your phone up, didn't I? I know.
because everybody was blowing your phone up. That's why. So it's a cause and effect. But it's around the College Board, and what they're rolling out, what they have rolled out is what they're calling the Environmental Context Dashboard, and we're going to be referring to this as the ECD. And so, Mark, I know you got blown up with a billion questions, so it was only appropriate that we take the time to address them in the question segment this time. So we're going to start with, Mark, what is it? And I'm sure our listeners are deep into it, but it could be some out there that aren't familiar with what's going on. And this is, what is the adversity index? I'm sorry, the environmental context dashboard, because I understand that, the College Board's come back and said, poo on you media for calling it an adversity index.
Correct. Okay, well, that was a really good introduction, Anika. Every few years, a new initiative occurs that changes the admissions landscape, and there've been quite a few in the last 4 or 5 years. We had the advent of the Coalition as a competitor to the Common App. That was a biggie. Redesigned SAT 2016, and early FAFSA using prior year for your financial information when you file your FAFSA. Major initiatives. Those are 3 of the biggest ones in the last 5 years. This is right up there, and it may even end up being bigger than any of them. That's how big this is going to be. And so we want to break it down, and we don't want to do it hastily. And it's only the 3rd time we've ever had a breaking news segment. We did it when University of Chicago went test optional, and we did it, of course, with the William Singer's, scandal, operation, whatever they called it. Hustle act. I forgot the name. I tried to block it out. His little hustle. But we spent 3 episodes on and we also have done one on the Harvard's Harvard affirmative action case. So we're going to really take our time on this. So we're going to take the next 4 weeks and really do a deep dive. So today we want to talk about what is the environmental context dashboard and why is the College Board rolling it out? And then next week, what is the case against the environmental context being a good idea? 3rd week, what is the case for the environmental context dashboard being a good idea? And 4th, what are the things to watch over the next few years regarding the rollout of the ECD, the reaction to the ECD, and the impact of the ECD? And by the way, we're going to call it ECD because I cannot get my hand around environmental context dashboard all the time.
Right.
But Anika, when I was prepping for the lesson, what my biggest fear was?
What's that?
I was going to say STD instead of ECD. Oh. It's not STD. It's ECD.
Mark?
So slap me across the face if I mess up as we go through this over the next 4 weeks.
I think we'll be editing that out.
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's get into it. So the College Board began developing this tool in 2015 because colleges were asking for more objective data on student backgrounds. And several admissions officers indicated they were really worried about the Supreme Court with becoming more conservative, that they may disallow race-based affirmative action, and that they wouldn't be able to have all perspectives in the classroom the way that they felt they wanted to have. In fact, Anthony Carnevale, the director of Georgetown Center for Education, who used to work at the College Board, he came out and said that the purpose he feels is to get at using race without using race, because there is no race component at all to this environmental context dashboard. I think it would be naive not to mention that the College Board has seen college after college go test optional because many colleges have been disturbed by how closely the SAT mirrors income and educational data of the applicants' parents. So they needed a tool to counteract this trend because it is generally accepted that if the Supreme Court overturns affirmative action, colleges will go test optional at an alarming rate, and the SAT could risk becoming even more irrelevant. So one could argue that this was an offensive move to preserve their market share and to get a leg up on the ACT. I think it would be naive not to mention that the College Board has seen college after college go test optional because many colleges have been disturbed by how closely the SAT mirrors income and educational data of the applicant's parents. So they needed a tool to counteract this trend because it is generally accepted that if the Supreme Court overturns affirmative action, colleges will go test optional at an alarming rate, and the SAT could risk becoming even more irrelevant. So one could argue that this was an offensive move to preserve their market share and to get a leg up on the ACT. So what is this dashboard? So what they're doing is they are looking at 15 different factors. So what is this environmental context dashboard? So what the College Board has come up with many, many researchers, are 3 main areas where they can supply additional information that show some of the barriers and the adverse circumstance that some students have to surmount or overcome in order to excel academically. And they've divided them into 3 main categories. They have what they call the neighborhood environment that you're coming from. So this dashboard is going to look at things like, what is the crime rate? What is the intensity of crime in the community the student is from? What are housing values like? How many vacant homes are there? What's the percentage of people living below poverty? Then they're going to look at the family environment, things like median income of the zip code, single parent or not. Is there a lot of ESL, English as a second language, spoken in that community? And what is the education level in the area? And then they're going to look at the high school environment, the school environment. And they're going to look at things like what percentage of students free and reduced lunch, what's the opportunity to take AP classes, how many people take AP classes, what are AP scores like, what are under matching rates. So all of these things, there's a high level of sophistication is going to be on this environmental context dashboard. This is not going to change the SAT score. So the SAT score will be there. But alongside it will be a score between 1 and 100, which reveals what they call overall disadvantage level. So what they've done is they've made 50 the norm. So 50 will be the national average. These are norm scores. So 10% of people will have a 1 to 10, and another 10% from 11 to 20, another 10%, 20 to 30, so that you can look at this disadvantage level, and it'll be right on there. And it's a way for an admissions officer to be able to take into context the challenges that a student has experienced both in their neighborhood and in their school and the families that are in the neighborhood. So there's a lot more I want to say, Anika, about it, but I just want to stop and get your initial thoughts.
I know. Well, I wanted to say there's so many questions I have, but I know you're going to address them when we talk about the case for and against it.
Yes.
I'm trying not to spoil anything.
I know it's hard for your mind not to go there, isn't it? So let's focus on what it is today. Okay.
Hold on. Wait, Mark, Mr. New York Times. Yes, you got called in yet again. So tell us, okay, because I promise I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just talk about like the context you were called in on that article, because you were called in. I almost forgot about that. Oh my God. Yeah. So how did that, what's like the main, like, what is the big overarching question about? Like, how did they pull you into that? Or in what context did they pull you into that article?
They wanted to know what my first impressions of the, ECD. Now, interesting, you've brought this up in your introduction, which was, at the time, everybody was calling it an adversity score index, an adversity index. That was throughout all the media. And there was a lot of backlash. And so the College Board, has since sort of slapped the media and said, you called it the wrong name. It is an environmental context dashboard. They wanted to know things like what my impression was of this, whether I thought it was a good thing, whether I thought it was a bad thing, how I thought it would be used by colleges, and basically, what is the significance of this? And is this a good idea, bad idea, and how do I think colleges will use it? So But guess what,
What?
Anika?
What?
I thought I gave them some really, really, really good quotes. They told me it'll, they always do this when they call. The article's running tomorrow online, and then it'll be in the paper. And I got that thing, and I got cut out at the editing floor. So I guess I wasn't very profound. So it's all good. It was all good. It happens. It happens sometimes. But
okay,
yeah.
so but I guess we do have to stop there.
Yes,
because we are going to spoil it.
Yes,
for the rest of the
yes.
Okay.
So the question is just let's stay focused on the actual content today, right? And and of what exactly it is. Like, I think why it came about. It came about because schools were coming to colleges and saying, we need more context. We need more context in reading the backgrounds that students come from. Because everybody knows that SAT scores are highly, highly, highly correlated with parent income and parent education.
Right. Yeah.
So when and anyone who reads holistically, they will take that into consideration. It's a double doctor family. So of course they're going to do well. They have all these educational advantages from at home. So they wanted that. And the problem is some schools don't have school profiles at all. Some school profiles are inconsistent. And a lot of times neighborhood information is inconsistent. Now, on this trip, Anika, I talked with one of the admission officers on this trip when I met with these colleges, right? And I said, what do you think about the new environmental context dashboard? And one of the admissions officers said to me, you know what, Mark? It's going to help us because there's sometimes we don't even get a school profile and we need more information to know the background of the student. And sure, we do our own individual personal read, but there's times if everybody gave us consistent information, we may not need it as much, but we don't always get consistent information. So a couple more things, is that what they're going to do is they're going to give, for some schools, some students come from places where the ACT dominates. Right. So you think,
right.
So in those cases, they're going to do a concordant ACT to convert the SAT to the ACT so that people can see that. The ACT has given very mixed messaging so far, whether or not they're going to follow suit.
Okay.
Some people are saying we're working on our own versions. Other voices are saying not so fast. So let's not get into that too much. It's getting ahead of ourselves. But the bottom line is an admission officer is going to be able now to see how much disadvantage, sure, it's called an environmental context dashboard, but the name of the score is a disadvantage score. It's a score. And one thing that has not been clear, so far the College Board is saying that we are not going to tell people what that score is. So the colleges will see it, but other people won't. And they are indicating that they might change their mind on that.
Wait, when you say what other people are you talking about?
Okay, so
when you say, are you talking about the family won't see the score?
No, the student themselves.
Oh.
Their position initially is that they have access to all of this data. And they have incredibly detailed census data that they have through the American Century Survey, which provides incredible detail. The American Community Survey, I'm sorry. They have all kinds of data, and the College Board has all this data. So they're putting it all together, and their thinking initially is, does a kid from a tough neighborhood with a lot of crime and poor schools need to know that we rank them as having a disadvantage level of 95 on a scale of 1 to 100? Is that helpful for them to know that? Or does that just create more misery and distress in their already troubled life? So their thinking is that they won't reveal that, but there's been tremendous backlash against that. And so they've come back and said, well, we're considering changing that. The one other thing I didn't say, I think that's important to say in sort of explaining this, Anika. So the College Board has tested this with 50 schools this year. And even last year, they've been doing some pilot work with this.
I guess that makes
getting
sense,
feedback from 50 schools in 2018-19. And then 150 are going to be used next year, up to 150, in the pilot, and they're getting feedback from all of them, what worked, what didn't work, what changes need to be made. And then the full rollout is going to be in 2021. So the full rollout, so
didn't realize that.
Yeah. So that's one more thing to add is they're still tweaking and figuring out and getting feedback from the schools, like how effective it was. Any comment? I know it's hard to get ahead, right? Like you want to ask opinions of it, but
I know.
It's hard.
Well,
it's hard for me too.
I got all kinds of mixed emotion around the kid not knowing though. Like I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, no, wait. I don't know. I can't wait to see how that pans out because I don't
any
know.
questions on the content of what actually it is? It's a score that looks at these 15 categories, right? Looking at school data, neighborhood data, family data, pulled off the census reports and College Board's own robust resources. NCES data is included in there, and it's nationally normed, so that basically, the average score is going to be 50, and it's a disadvantaged score. So what it's designed to do is to cause colleges to be able to read scores in the context of the background that the person has come from.
Right.
And, one thing that is interesting, I will say, is that David Coleman, who is the CEO of the College Board, basically what he has come out and said is that we feel we do a good job of providing an instrument to assess college readiness through the SAT. But what we haven't been able to do in the past is have a measure of what a student has overcome. So you can see what they've been able to achieve in the context of what they've been overcome. And what he's indicated is that this adversity score will surface people who have done more with less. So when you see a kid who has like 300, 400 points higher than everybody else in their school, I don't know if you remember me saying this a couple of weeks ago, Anika, but Swarthmore VP of Enrollment, Jim Bach, says our faculty, when we see a kid that's scoring several hundred points above the national average in their school, even if it's not as high as our average scores, that's a kid our faculty want in the classroom. So they're partly trying to identify these diamonds in the rough.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Woo. No, it's darn exhilarating. Like, it's exciting. I don't know what. And I cannot wait until we record again and go through these cases against. And don't you dare say adversity score again, Mark. You got to get the ECD in our heads.
Hey, can we do a little cheerleading chant practice through the week? ECD, you and me.
No. It will not
happening. Not happening.
Oh, man. I can't, but this is very exciting. And man, I just, we'll see.
Well, I can tell you I'm not going to get ahead of ourselves, but there's a tremendous amount of resistance, and there are also some.
I can only imagine.
And there's also some strong questions that are raised. You only get better when your critics attack you.
Right.
I remember I learned this in grad school. Someone said, instead of being upset when you get criticized, let your critics be your unpaid counselors. Like, people pay big money to go get consultants, right? To show them how they can be better.
Right.
And a lot of the criticisms that are coming forward have a lot of validity to them. And we'll talk about those criticisms next week because some of them are pretty compelling.
All right. Stop, Mark. I'm shaking in my boots. We got to stop now.
Okay, right now. Stop. Red flag. Red means stop.
Now, stop it.
This is cool because, we have our last segment of our interview with Yancie Davis. And Yancie was one of the many admissions people that I met with. I met with Yancie on Friday when I visited Macalester.
Nice.
So it was nice to see him in his own turf, especially seeing as that was a school that Karis considered. So in the final part of my interview with Yancie gives us the final 4 non-cognitive variables. Yancie and I talk about what a CBO is. Yancie tells us why leadership is so important, But what really makes this interesting is all the ways that Yancie recounts that a student can be assessed as being a leader by using the non-cognitive variables. Yancie closes out by talking about non-traditional knowledge and what it is and why it's important. And then he really lights up when he talks about interviews and why he sees great value to the admissions interview. He shares some other research on character and academic success. And I get Yancie's take on whether there's an overlap between some of the other studies that have been done on character traits in college admissions and non-cognitive variables, or whether non-cognitive variables are something totally different all to themselves. And then I ask Yancie a question about motivation, and he delivers a great answer. And of course, our regular listeners know I have to put Yancie on the hot seat in our rapid fire round and find a little bit more about his life. So I think you're going to enjoy the final segment with Mr. Yancie Davis of Macalester College. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So let's talk about the fifth variable, availability or ability to identify strong support person / network. Talk to me about this. What do you want to say?
Yeah, so as we talk about that ability to identify strong networks, that is talking about a student being able to seek out and take advantage of a strong support network, or can identify how they be able to turn to someone in a crisis for encouragement. So I think this really does speak to kind of like the work of community-based organizations and nonprofit organizations and college access programs. Of seeing that a student has taken advantage of being a part of an organization like that speaks to the fact that, if they've been a part of this program for like 2 or maybe 4 years, depending on the setup of that program, that it shows that they've received a training that might even be absent from their school setting to show that that they are being prepared to be successful on a college campus, or if they do run into any kind of like issues while they're on their college campus that not only might they have shown an example of being able to reach out to someone and find help or find resources, that CBO might be a resource for them. Because some CBOs do continue to serve students beyond high school and while they are students in college as well. So that's an example of that. And they might also talk about this in, again, an additional letter of recommendation that might come from that CBO, or they might talk about, these different activities they might do through either an extracurricular activity, or they might talk more about it in their essay as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about CBOs before, we've touched on it, but if our listeners never heard that episode, it's an acronym for community-based organizations, and organizations that help students with the college process. Oftentimes under-resourced and underrepresented students. It's what I do in my day job at KIPP. I basically function as a CBO counselor. I have a bunch of students that I'm their college counselor for that are spread out at different schools all around the country. And so that's what he's referring to there when he says that, when he uses that term, Yancie. So the sixth one would be successful leadership experiences. Now, is this valued because past leadership experiences are just so highly correlated to leadership on campuses? Is that why leaders just emerge and so it's something that can be undervalued? Or is it other factors? Because I can see how that also relates to confidence and some of the other things you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that leadership is just if we see a student that has been a leader, in high school, we have some sense of knowing that they're going to they have those skills, they have that personality, they have that ability to be able to come and have people kind of engage with them as they come to a college campus as well. So absolutely, it does value kind of past leadership experiences just as much as it values kind of just the experiences in which they've been a leader. And I will kind of delineate in 2 different ways, because I think leadership experience can kind of be within the structure of a identified organization. But experience, they could be a leader even in the absence of kind of being a part of this group or this institution or something like that. They might have been a leader within their family, maybe in the absence of kind of like traditional family members being there. So how are they someone that led their siblings maybe when their traditional parents weren't there or something like that? So yeah, it definitely does kind of speak to those opportunities where they've been leaders, whether that's in church, whether that's in sports. Maybe they were a gang leader, like before, like they were in a gang a long time ago, realizing that it's not for them as well. But they might speak to how they were kind of like, they just have had the ability for people to kind of like, I guess, flock to them in a way.
Right.
I guess we know how leaders are, that, just people respond to people who just carry those leadership skills. And if a student is able to come into the right situation on a college campus, and put in a situation to succeed, and they have students that flock to them, that's going to be beneficial to those students, because that student is able to help guide students in a great direction in that way.
Sounds great. All right. So we've got two more here, and let's talk about them. So the seventh is demonstrated community service. And I know the word demonstrated is really important here. What does that tell you about an applicant? And how do you differentiate between the person that is just going through the motions and has 100 hours on their resume versus someone that truly has demonstrated community service?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that are kind of like is underrated about community service, we know that some schools have community service as a graduation requirement. Some schools, colleges have it as an admissions requirement. I think the importance of community service is kind of twofold. I think one is about what is a student going to do with the education that they're receiving, first and foremost. Is a student going to take that education and use it to the betterment of other people? Is an important question to ask. And I think the second piece that comes with it is the realization that college campuses, that we are communities in and of ourselves. And so that idea of a student who has shown some ability or interest in, kind of like helping communities and making communities better in some way is going to be important to us in terms of what we're trying to look for in terms of a student use of community service during their time in high school. So that's definitely what we're trying to identify when we're looking for that in an application. And particularly when students are putting this on the extracurricular activities list, that generally speaking, at least as a school that uses common application, that a student is going to list, how many hours a week, how many weeks a year, and what years in high school that they've done that activity. And so if a student is doing, maybe they have 3 or 4, kind of like community service activities, but they've done it for like 1 hour a week for a few weeks of a year, and they did it in 12th grade, maybe 11th and 12th grade, versus a student who maybe does 1 or 2 things, but they've done it consistently over time, throughout high school, and they're doing, multiple hours per week, or we can kind of like tell that type of stuff from looking at that extracurricular activities list. Furthermore, a student might choose to expand upon one of those in their essay and going deeper into the reasons of why they're doing that extracurricular activity. All that stuff is going to kind of like tell us more, and it goes beyond the surface of just listing it on the application and telling us of why that community service is important.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many students I meet with between summer of 11th and 12th, and they say, what type of community service do I need to do to look good? And I'm like, oh boy, we got some work to do here.
At that point, they might as well not do any, unless it's like a graduation requirement. I would almost tell them not to put it on their application. So yeah.
Yeah, because you guys can sniff through that. So it's so apparent what's going on there, right? I think people just don't realize that, but that ones you can see through a mile away. And I would say if it's something you really want to do it. But it may even be advisable not even to put it on. So how would you say that? What if a student said, I've really got a passion and an interest in this, but it just emerged? Would you say don't put it on because it may look bad, or would you say put it on? What are your thoughts on that?
I would tell them to put it on, but I would almost imagine if it's truly a passion, that I would imagine that's going to be talked about in some way in their essay. Yeah. And so that's the thing. If it is a realized thing, I imagine it's going to be something that's going to be pretty heavy on their mind. So I would imagine they would talk more about it somewhere else.
Yeah, and it may even come up through a counselor or something too, which is great. Yeah. So we've made it to number 8, our last one, non-traditional knowledge acquired. Give us some examples of this and let us know what what this tells you about a student.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about non-traditional knowledge being acquired, we're talking about a student having acquired knowledge in a like a sustained or maybe even a culturally related way in any area. So including social areas, personally, within themselves or interpersonal as well. So just talking, just more about an experience when they've actually, kind of like learned something that was important to them in that way and being able to speak about that. This is almost exclusively going to be found in an essay in some way when there's like a realization that they've had. And it's something that's not related to, I learned about this subject in this class. We're not talking about that maybe they learned about why it's important to never give up. Now that's like a non-traditional knowledge type of thing in which we're talking about. That's a very like vanilla answer in that way, but it's more so the idea that they have this realization and they learn something that is not necessarily taught in the classroom, and how that information in which they learned is important, and just being able to kind of like say that on an application.
Yeah, this is great. And an interview would be another place too, right? Especially schools that are doing evaluative interviews. I mean, that's something that you could detect for schools that are using interviews.
Definitely. And I would say actually a lot of these things in which we talked about, the interview is actually going to be a really good way to do that, because interviews in themselves are kind of like you get to learn more about the student that has nothing to do with testing. When we're talking with the student one-on-one, that has nothing to do with grades or test scores, because we already know that in most cases. And so in this idea that we're learning about the student, we're learning about the person, and a lot of the questions they're usually asked in an interview are kind of getting to all these things that we just talked about in that way. So, we might, ask more about like this, we saw that you said you did community service. Tell us a little bit more about it. And so again, I think it really helps suss out some of the things that might be listed just to be listed on the application, because then a student really has to kind of like speak to some of these things. So that's where interviews kind of come into play. Interviews actually help with a lot of these kind of like non-cognitive variables in which we're talking about.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Arguably, the best place to get cutting-edge information is on Twitter. So I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite college admissions and college-related Twitter accounts with our friends of the podcast throughout the entire summer. Let's start out with the powerful organization that's in the news every day. It's the College Board, and the Twitter account is simply @collegeboard. These guys own the SAT and the AP exams and the CSS profile, which means you'll get an easy way to stay on top of test dates and deadlines. Plus, practice questions and tips for the day, advice on narrowing down your college list, and testimonials from students on their experience about applying for admission and financial aid. If you want to follow the latest on the Environmental Context Dashboard, or ECD, I know of no better way than the Twitter account @collegeboard. We will now return to the final segment of my interview with Yancie Davis on how non-cognitive variables impact admissions decisions. So what's really great to me, Yancie, I've always loved the focus on character, and I've always loved the focus on intangibles. And, I did boarding school admissions for 9 years, and boarding school admissions is incredibly holistic because every kid is being handpicked and there's a small number and one kid impacts the dorm. And so interviews and all this stuff was important, but we didn't use that term. And also at KIPP, we've really put a lot of faith in some of the research done by Paul Tough. He wrote the book, How Children Succeed, where he emphasized grit and optimism. And Angela Duckworth, who I had the pleasure of spending time with, has done some outstanding research at the University of Pennsylvania on grit and perseverance. And so I've seen these other factors, and then I look at these non-cognitive variables, and I wasn't seeing that a lot. But as I listen to you, I'm hearing that, no, grit is built into that. So it sounds like you don't necessarily disagree that those things are important. Maybe you do. Comment on that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely believe that grit is important. I think that, we are just kind of like speaking to the same idea. It's just different words are being used. So I think as we talked about, like that determination, that strength of character,
Yes.
that's grit. And
Yes.
I think, and I think it's just putting a different kind of like piece on it. And we talk about optimism, positivity, positive self-concept, and just that idea of that I can get through things as well. So maybe, it's important that was like the number one, kind of like variable in which we talked about, because I think that part is important of being able to get through things when times get hard. And through that, I think this more so gets to like, what are the different ways in which they got through those things as opposed to just saying that you have it. And I think it's a part of I think of a larger whole, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And here's my last question. We'll get ready to wind down here. One thing that I found out, this is just completely anecdotal, but this is my 20th year doing either college admissions, boarding school admissions, or college placement. I have found incredible correlation between motivation and success, both in college and in life. And I'm even looking at kids that we took a chance on with soft test scores, over the years. And we jumped them over kids with much higher test scores, but had this incredible drive. And now I try to keep in touch with my students. I have a whole Facebook section of my students, and my former students now, a lot of them are into their mid-30s. And like the things they're doing, like, and to me, they're some of the most fulfilling applicants I was ever a part of admitting, because I know how much we debate it at committee. Like, look at these test scores. But yet we saw something in that character, and it's proven. It proved itself immediately on the campus, the impact that they had. And then it fleshed itself out in life when I look at what they're doing in life. But I never saw motivation in here. And to me, motivation was one of my biggest intangibles that I found tend to correlate. Am I incorrect? Do you feel motivation is sort of interwoven in here? It's just not labeled motivation? Or would you disagree that that's something that deserves to sort of be elevated as an intangible?
No, I think it in some ways gets to be its own kind of like its own intangible. It's kind of it's in its own bucket. I think from my personal view, and the idea of kind of like there's a motivation in and of itself. Like you're applying to college, so there's a reason. There's a why. I think the entire application should answer that question of why. Why are you doing this? And if you're approaching this application and what you're doing is literally like, I'm just listing this. I'm done. I did this. I did this. I did this. I did that. And that is it. And it doesn't answer the question of why, then it's missing that motivation piece. And chances are it's not going to get, the support that it needs when it gets to a lot of the end of these, application processes, when, the admissions office comes together and the student, the admissions officers are in that committee and making that decision and giving the votes and stuff like that, that the entire application in its whole should answer the why. So I think in that sense, as we talk about some of these, kind of like non-cognitive variables and all that, I think they all add to the motivation of why a student is doing this. I think that's why, some, experts say that, college isn't for everybody. Because if it doesn't answer the why, then why are you doing it? And so I think that the application kind of serves as that piece. And I would hope that as students are thinking about these and these different kind of like non-cognitive variables and remembering about the different things that come into an application, that you're thinking about your grades, you're thinking about the types of classes that you're taking. Are you taking the classes just because they told you these are the next classes to take? Or are you showing that you're going above and beyond to learn that thing that you want to learn? That's motivation. If you are kind of like telling, if you're getting into the story and you are writing in the essay that you give, if your essay that you're writing is one that you took time to sit down to write and try to get right and tell the story that you want to tell, or did you literally copy an essay that you used from a class earlier? Is that showing me motivation, or is that showing me that I had this available and put it in? So again, I think that the spirit of the application comes through as well. And I think all these add up to speak towards that motivation at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic, Yancie. Now, I didn't tell you this because you might have turned me down, but I put every interviewee on the hot seat, just a way of peeling back the onion, letting our listeners get to know you a little bit more, a little more lighthearted. So I got a couple rapid fire questions for you in closing. So let's start with, and I'm going to mix it up. So let's start with your favorite sport.
Basketball, for sure.
Cool. Who's your favorite team?
The Warriors, Golden State Warriors.
You're a front runner, but then again, you're from the Bay Area, so I got to cut you some slack.
Absolutely.
You get to be, you're not a front runner. That's a hometown team. Life has been good for you lately.
Yeah, no, we've been fans since the bad days,
Yes.
and so or even the old good days. I was there. Even when I was young, I remember Run TMC. So I've
Nice.
definitely been a fan.
Gee, that is a while. I remember because I'm a huge basketball guy. Good stuff.
Yep.
Good stuff. Your favorite place you've ever visited in your life?
Jamaica.
Nice. If you couldn't be a college admission officer, what would you do? Or let's just say college work at all. So because I know you've done other work on colleges, but you didn't work at a college. What else would you do?
And I couldn't be a basketball player.
I'm not giving you that cop out.
I'd work in advertising.
Oh.
That's actually what I wanted to do when I was graduating from undergrad. And so yeah, I actually worked for an advertising agency for a year. It was a small firm, but that's what I want to do is work at an advertising agency.
Nice. Your favorite food?
Favorite food is other than desserts, I would probably say it'd be a tie between like panko crusted chicken or baked macaroni and cheese.
There you go. Oh, my daughter can make some, and my wife, some wicked macaroni and cheese. Thanksgiving is good in our house. Yeah. So listen, I always have to ask people for their favorite book, but that question just became so hard that I do let people throw a second one or two out there if you can't decide on one. But give our listeners a couple books that have been impactful in your life.
Yeah. So let's see. Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Classic.
By Zora Neale Hurston. Was the first book that I admit that I'm not a voracious reader. I'm a more visual person, but that was the first book in high school that I ever read from cover to cover. So that has always, kind of like stuck there for me. The Souls of Black Folk by W. Du Bois is also a favorite as well. And then the Bible will probably be book number.
Hey, that's great. Those are some good books right there. All three of them. Yeah. I like them all. So listen, this is fantastic. Listening family, we're going to have Yancie back to do a deeper dive into Macalester College, which is a college I love. And so you'll be hearing from him again shortly. But thanks so much for coming on Your College Bound Kid, Yancie. Really appreciate your time.
Next week in the news, colleges have been under pressure to admit needier kids, and it's backfiring. And we'll be in chapter 71 of 171 answers. And Mark shares from his 13 steps that your child can take if they are waitlisted. And next week's question segment continues with the ECD. And Mark is going to outline the case against it. And from Mark's interview, starts fresh next week with our first college professor, Dr. Josie Urbastando. And Dr. Urbastando is an English professor at the University of Miami and the founder of Write Your Acceptance, Preparation for the Personal Statement, Part 1.
We're done.
Yes, we are. That was so good.
Yeah. I'm still in Minnesota Central Time Zone mode and Airbnb and graduation mode. Did you do any special graduation dinner or anything?
Well, we celebrated the night before because, his graduation was Sunday morning. So we know folks had to get down the road. So we had a nice little, what did we start? Saturday, about 6, 7 o'clock really is when we really kicked off. And yeah. And then we, of course, a couple people stayed back. My family just kicked it afterward and it was
So my mom was in town and she treated to Buco de Beppo. So we went out and did the big Buco de Beppo. Oh, it's like Italian family style. And it's a chain. Yeah. And then we also, 2 different times we went out for Vietnamese food. So it was all good. So great times. You know what? We have a lot of listeners in Minnesota. You know what? You guys should be really proud of your state. You've got a special thing going up there. I really enjoyed it. But notice I went in the summer and not the winter.
Facts.
All right, Anika, have a good week.
You too.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo, and marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.